that there is no question the goals and objectives in a single specialty group can be very markedly understood by the participants usually, okay, when they're in a single specialty group. And that most, are you looking at the numbers and realizing most of the single specialty growth, and let's go to another chart to see where most of the growth has been. Let's try the one where there are three separate charts, two out of the MGMA large volumes, and one of them I took from Romer. Let's take the bottom chart first. The bottom chart from Roma simply is a nice historical chart that you may be aware of and should be aware of by now in other respects. In the very year the report was coming out and reporting where things were in 30 or 31, published in 32, they're reporting 239 groups, less than 1% of all doctors. 40 doesn't show very much growth. 46 still doesn't. The real growth occurs as a result of what? Can they guess what's occurring after 46? What would make the first wave of significant growth up to 1,500 groups by the next time 550, 1,559 but the first count then in 59 shows already 5% in groups. What is causing that? It's the wave after World War II of so many doctors coming back in 46 and concluding by 47, 48, 9 that they have worked in group practice. The coverage worked well, the colleagueship worked well. In the military, they were put into groups, and this was a mass phenomenon, which World War I had only the slightest impact in creating earlier. After that, it's a steady stream which is way higher than that today. Nobody believes that you're today not dealing with anything less than 1/3 of all active physicians in group practice. The numbers don't have to be surveyed for that to be the, like for instance, a 75 figures based on the AMA Center for Health Statistics. Anybody who ever looks at their data, reads the prefaces, realizes a lot of their questionnaires are distributed 2 years earlier, in 73, 74. They're late with whatever they're getting out, and they're processing very late, and that a tremendous amount of growth has been since. That's naked growth of group practice, right? We're not saying it's good or bad, of what style it is yet, okay? And we're not judging it to be good and bad. Now let's move up and look as to who owns it, and whether it's general practice, single specialty, or multi-specialty. And we'll use general practice, and the MGMA tables now, forget the middle one, we're moving to the top one, are about of the same time, but it was the best table to break it down by ownership. Let's move to single specialty and multi-specialty. There are more groups in which of those two categories? More single specialty groups or more multi-specialty groups? More single specialty. But what this doesn't tell you, it's not the lists of doctors. There are way more doctors in multi-specialty groups. This doesn't show you the numbers of doctors. You got it? In other words, the proportions are much higher because an average single specialty group is smaller and a multi-specialty group is larger. General practice has moved over and become known now today as what we see a great deal of: family practice groups, family health centers, where there are several people together. Now notice differences in ownership. Until we get past sole proprietorship, if we stay in the total first column and lump them all together, sole proprietorship is not very common. Partnership is quite common. Professional corporation is quite common. Association may still be doctors associating together without a partnership or a corporation. It still doesn't tell us. This kind of questionnaire, it's not only the government, it's the AMA, everybody has a looseness the terminology here. They send out questionnaires and ask questions, and the answers don't always mean. You remember in Madison and some of the other presentations, the data is not always as meaningful as we'd like it to be. For instance, association, we would hope, if it was defined, was a nonprofit association, so we'd get some data, but it's not. So some of the people who answered it could be associated together, as some doctors are, in neither a partnership nor a corporation, but, still calling themselves that, and not linked to a nonprofit. One reason I make that statement is, if you'll notice, there's a larger number. At that point, it was like foundations. Come across on foundations and notice there are 26 multi-specialty foundation-sponsored ones and 7 non, right? But look at the line above. The reason I assume association is a mixed bag is that single specialty groups are hardly ever affiliated with nonprofits, and numerically they outnumber the multi-specialties in the numbers there. So what we might be dealing with is the 191 multi-specialty groups might, for the most part, be nonprofit affiliated or governed, together with the foundation ones. And that might be the numbers around 75 as to the way things were. Percentages below, the second half of that chart is simply reflections of the above. The important thing for you to remember is this is not a reflection of the numbers of doctors. The numbers of doctors overwhelmingly, are in the multi-specialty side compared to the single specialty side. It takes a sharper growth of single specialty numbers. See, way out of proportion, the multi-specialty pull the numbers up. Now, the middle table is like we were getting into a little bit of the business side of being an administrator. You all have heard some of these figures, have you not, before? This rough 2.5 figure of allied personnel. How about somebody speaking to that point? Would someone care to comment on how significant that is? Forget the variables there, they're next to no variables. Let's call it 2.5. It's the MGMA standard statement. Under what circumstances would it be much higher, do you think? Ms. Harris?
I was going to.
Go ahead. You comment. No, ask your question.
Well, from looking at this, it seems like the clerical personnel are the most important. They've got more of those positions than anything else. And then, and that's in each category. Single.
Yeah, there's no question. Yeah.
And then when you look at it, the next highest percentages end up with general practice and multi-specialties under licensed practical nurses and nurses' aides.
Mm-hmm.
You have a high percentage of those than RNs, and I would have thought it was a little different.
You would have not thought they would be different.
I thought there would be a difference in that.
I don't know that this kind of data is all as significant in its breakdown beyond the 2.5 as, in other words, certainly what you can see is the single specialties show very few LPNs and nurses' aides, right? And part of the reasons for that is, where would a radiology group keep people? Where would, why would they have anybody around? I mean, they've got females for the most part in white, enough for whatever legal protection the males think they need to, in a radiology group as x-ray techs, etc. There's a whole bunch of groups that just so skew all this data that it doesn't mean as much as it does here. It's rather the 57 against the 44. The single specialties don't tell us very much. They neither need very many registered nurses nor very, licensed, for whatever reasons, or because the numbers used here. That 102, 126 doesn't tell us a great deal of whether very many people answered their questionnaire, in terms of the data. Whereas the data above is supposed to be very large, national survey. This is more an MGMA type survey. But let's talk about 2.5. Of whatever kinds of people, Can someone here conceive that many groups wouldn't think of functioning at that lower ratio? Is that possible? Would that be inefficient necessarily? How do you count here? How do you develop a ratio? See, per physician, right? That's the way it reads. Really, where does a PA fit in? Where does an FNP fill in? Where do a lot of, for instance, the following are the kinds of debates that take place at administrative meetings. You're trying to get a ratio, okay, of ancillary personnel really to providers. And if it's way off, you're going to be uneconomic, you're going to be unable to function, right, in the cost per visit. And somebody has come up saying this is equal to 2.5 to 1, okay? That's what we're looking at there. And that is so standard, it's been around for years, this kind of survey by MGMA never comes in much off, okay? And I have seen very beautiful family practice groups that operate as low as excellent services, only 2 employees to 1, and have a good reception service, good billing service, carry an administrator. But the administrator makes all the ledger entries, you know, he's got the CPA just about eliminated, his costs cut to the bone, okay? That is possible. On the other hand, how high do you think this ratio could go and place still stay afloat? Could it go to 3.5? Could it go 4? Where could it go to? Anybody got any ideas? Think you take any courses here that are going to tell you anything about any of this? About this real world? You really believe you're going to in any way bump into this real world at what it's like to be a administrative single specialty versus, you know, community-oriented practice versus a assigned hospital staffer, you know, trying to set up a satellite and determining these ratios. First, to get their statement of position and determine provider. Who could be considered a provider now besides the physician? You know, say a community-oriented, essentially primary care, but in large multi-specialty group. $5 million a year was to the administrator. Huh? All right. Let's start now. All the ways you can change these ratios and play games. What would you do with a PA and FNP? Are they equal to a physician? Huh?
They're counted in the others.
Now you're saying they counted in up here. I would say if you do that, you're going to end up in such groups being at 4, as high as 6 to 1. If you do that, if you use them, you know, and if you're using a lot of other things, okay? But there's other ways of counting, aren't there? I changed the word to provider from their word, okay? Are these people providers? Don't they face-to-face with the patients? Don't they order everything from prescriptions, x-ray, lab, do it all, carry prescription pads, already signed, all done? Function maybe in an independent office. Wait
But then
everything, yeah.
it depends on the type of practice you have. You can also put RNs, you can put PTs. You can
Yeah,
put
but let's just start with them before we get to the gray areas, because these people really, if you ask some patients who they go to, they may go to Mr. So-and-so or to Miss So-and-so, you know. And this has been shown over and over again. And then about once every 2 months I see Dr. So-and-so. Or some of them may be dissatisfied with that range. I wish I saw him more. And others may say, and I like him. I like him. They spend a lot more time with him. Okay? And then they may have different views. There's all kinds of surveys on this. But watch what happens. In most of our debates, we come up with this figure. They're worth a half. So now let's take a hypothetical. You got 10 MDs in the group. You tell me what we are now. Watch how you're going to change the ratios. You got 1 optometrist. Any question that the following people are called doctors? You got 2 podiatrists. They're all doctors, right? They were using physicians. So that's too crude a word. That's because MDMA comes out of certain, either professional or, they come out of business management for doctors, and they think of themselves as working as doctors. So all these people for sure could be counted up here as ones. Now you might have 4 of these people around, times 2, 10, 11, 13. You willing to go 2 more for 4 of these? You willing to? What do we got there? 15? Any more? They've got physical therapy, got RNs, they've got LPN, got respiratory technicians, they've got MSWs. It's a good, broad, widely, it's the administrator responsible for 100 employees. And what are we dividing by? 15. Wow. Let's add, change the whole ball game. They have pharmacists, 3 of them, plus 7 equal in that 5 million, 1 million gross. Now what do you want to count? Huh?
What did you just say?
Pharmacists.
Three
3 pharmacists. I'm just indicating all through here you're going to have aides. Just trying to indicate 3 of those and 10 pharmacy aides are producing $1 million in pharmacy revenues, okay? In just filling prescriptions. This isn't all. What do you think if he's ordering? And what if you come along and say they have 2 afternoons of urology a week, 2 afternoons of ophthalmology a week, okay? And 2 of ENT, afternoon part-timers in private practice coming in 2, 4, 6. For sure you got 0.6, right? You're at 15.6 for your figure here. Okay? At 2.5, you really think you're going to operate this clinic? Look at those people. Think you're ever going to try to stay inside these MTMA ratios? With the kinds of things I talked about there. ASCP text, X-ray. You got a broadly based way to bring in dollars in ancillary services. And that's typical of a large, community-oriented primary care in a league. Weighted, but still, a lot of other things in there. Of course, even some of this will include internal medicine, family practice, peds, all of which are that. It'll include general surgery. We divide it up to the 10, and then it's got those kinds of things ordering. It's got a small operating room, outpatient, where all the vasectomies are performed, where podiatry surgery is performed. It doesn't need hospital, say general, anything without a general anesthesia. So it's an aggressive effort to do all the things that they're saying it's the way they ought to be done outside the hospital. How about that? What kind of ratios could you have? Could you survive with that? 2.5 would be 40 people, maybe 37. You really think that many people? The only people you've counted out are the PAs, the FNPs, they've come in here. And then you've got everybody else there. You really think you could carry all of that, plus the aides, the receptionists, the business office, any computer terminals, people, the administration? What is your guess? You'll be able to carry that with that kind of numbers? I'm not talking about Orange Chatham. I'm talking about these are producing doctors. You think this is not a university, experiment, okay? For affiliation of people walking around. Well, suppose I told you that in a lot of those kinds of clinics, there is no question they would be more like, instead of 2.5 up here, it'd be more like 7 or 8 to 1, and it's very survivable. These are all, the ones I'm circling, all can make money. Let's put home health service too, okay? So you can break even by billing Medicare, okay? You lose money on that one, that's a minus. Huh? You can charge, but I'll assume you, and call all these neutrals, but that your lab can make money, your x-ray can make money, and mucho money here. And these can survive, okay? I'm saying all these people lead to the survival of these people, together with all the nurses' aides, all the LPNs, all the receptionists. You need telephone operators. If you think of the staffing, okay? When we get to personnel on April 11th, and we pass it around, we're not going to spend a lot of time on personnel. You can take a little course on personnel. Or if you won't get in the course on personnel, it will be how do you live with a union contract if you had one. So we'll give you each a copy of the union contract. Inside of a clinic, you'll see the mucho classifications, the ways of survival. Okay? Does that mean that a person can say to you, like a steel mill, that I am a oh, you got an optical service. Anytime you got this kind of person, you got an optical service, and put a big circle for making money around that too. Right? It's expensive eyeglasses. Physical therapy. Okay, I mean it lightly. Both these are sort of, they can somehow, by splitting this person up between the clinic and here, it can be a service. See, if you had orthopedics here, this could be a mucho moneymaker, okay? But you don't have it in a primary care clinic, so it's a service. Social worker, I'm saying in crude bookkeeping terms, can't make it, but absolutely essential to keep these people from going batty on marital counseling and on lengthy, teenage counseling, and all the valuable services that these kind of people perform. And I want you all to argue with me, but I'm trying to get you to realize how far you can go with your ratios if you're charging correct fees, if you've got good collections, if you're handling yourself well administratively, and governing your costs. Okay? It is possible to have no relationship to textbooks and still no relationship to being 100% federal funded. A neighborhood health center might have been 16 to 1, because where would these others be? Totally non-productive what? Job trainers. And the trainers in turn, right, is to get jobs. There are van drivers. There are schedulers, right? There are outreach family health workers, right? Terribly nice services, terribly valuable people. But produce an income? No way, right? So you get tremendous out of that era, right? But into a modern era, if these doctors' costs are controlled, then instead of them drawing down 160,000 as an internist, they may be drawing down, and we need to raise the board and talk about some of that. What kind of ranges of salaries do doctors make? Since they charge, say in this triangle area, and what I've seen of bills, some pretty outrageous fees, they're about as high as they go anywhere in the East. California's a wild place. You got a wild guy here that's been with a wild bunch of clinics, but just in the very business-like part of California, I can't get over the fees they get away with in California, really. Fee value schedule that you all have seen. So that, doctors get away with being reimbursed as high as $125 for, like a day in the hospital, this kind of thing, which you can't get in most parts of the country. And they can send out bills for a consultation for $150 in internal medicine, expected to be reimbursed for it. People write the check like it's standard. But around here, you can walk into an internist's office and get a $75 bill as quick as looking at it. You can't do it without a workup. Am I wrong? I mean, without a full workup, they have sometimes dealt with a single problem.
By the way, I got a letter from that doctor here that real nice letter. I mean, it's
Rich doctor.
it was an orthopedic specialist what he saw last summer, and he charged me $122, and I hit him up
Yeah.
for And I gave him half the payment and wrote him and said I was curious if it was an out-of-pocket payment, would he charge the same amount versus insurance and all this stuff.
He wrote a sweet
He
letter.
wrote a unbelievably nice letter. He said, well, really glad that I was interested, and he was really happy that I've been keeping track with him, and I had written him and kept track with my bills, and he remembered his days at Chapel Hill and all this stuff.
This was without a cash, just a
This was just a
$120.
10-minute
10-minute
checkout. I mean, but he said that he had looked at my x-rays. That took him another 10 minutes, and then he had to make a diagnosis.
All right. What do you think? Let's take, what are you talking about? What can you hire family practitioners for? Internists, primary care, pediatricians. Let's, for a moment, the gray area, you know, I told you had a gray area a while ago. OB-GYN, some people are going, you know, the obstetrics for certainly is primary care. It's totally justified, but in many parts of the country, for a variety of reasons, if you're not big enough group for them to rotate, if you're not a Noah's Ark, they don't want to be alone. What, first of all, which is the lowest paid of those three? Huh? Yeah. Pediatrician's the lowest paid. You understand all, you're on warning, you've been on warning since the first day with me. I mean, I base everything I know on my experience, and maybe somebody, you come in here and you tell me that from this or that source, you know, no reason to question, you do so, okay? But this is pretty standard stuff I'm trying to get. Pediatricians are generally the lowest. Their journals are loaded with this. Why do we low grade ourselves so? Why do we keep our fees below everybody else? In human terms, the real problem is very simple. The mother is likely to walk in with 2 or 3 children who have infected each other, and he has to set a fee, you know, that part of the psychological situation is that if he's at 20 and wants to move to 30, you know, like an internist or something for a visit, not to 75, he's got to think of those 3 kids of handing her a $90 bill and prescriptions for an acute thing that may cost her $55 in the drugstore. I mean, it's a very concrete problem that bothers these people. Then psychologically, what kind of people tend to go into these worlds? You think they're as tough as the people who want to cut with a knife? No, they're not. This, above all, these are the procrastinators of the century. They're diagnosticians. They procrastinate. They love differential diagnosis. They're the intellectuals of medicine. And all of them, in a sense, of these people sometimes like to, sell people off the way we are, they can be a mixed bag. But that's always editorial comments, always free. These are the internists are generally noted. Like if you have a bunch of administrators together, then how do you ever know where interns' heads are? You can't make up their minds on the rules and differential diagnosis stuff over that world. So the only thing worse than that, they claim, is being a mental health administrator. But then I have Miss Alkins here, and I think she's going to be careful about coping with what happens to administering a staff that is really psychiatrists, psychologists, psychiatric social workers, and all their coterie of colleagues, because they analyzed everybody, including each other and the administrator, and those people draw very nice salaries for administering those places. So you don't want to get angry at community mental health center administrators who are listed making 60,000 perks, cars, and all, because the next morning they can appear in the newspapers and put the other column, what she's in, you can, and the NT group, the NT people write a letter to the editor saying that you're an SOB and you're violating all community standards. These people are very likely to take off into the world. And these are the diagnostic, these are the low ones. Anyone want to guess off the top of your head? Depends on the part of the country, but throw out some figure, anybody. I mean, anyway, what's the doctor expect to make nowadays? Measurements. What would the NHSC have paid him if he was in a community where they would pay him and if the Reagan administration hadn't cut it off? About what right now? I may be off 1,000. Anybody have an idea what they kept jacking it up, jacking it up, jacking it up? What did they get to? It'd be something like $37,000, I believe, I think they stopped it, and they want them to go private practice option. They don't want to carry them in the Corps, even though they all, 4 years. You have to meet so many standards for the Corps to carry them. But I think somewhere around there, it could be 39,000. Where would any of these people be? Anyone want to venture guesses? Let me just put down figures that vary all over the lot, okay? These are not helpful to you, and you could very well contradict me if you say you could never begin one with a triangle of these prices. You're right. I don't pretend I know the triangle, I don't know, where the outside were. But if you were starting, you were conceptualizing, you were with a group of people who want to do it, do something, and this was the kind of world you were in, then there shouldn't be much trouble in starting pediatricians at 40,000. There really shouldn't be much trouble in starting any of these at that. But there'd be variables. I mean, I'll put them down. The variables would obviously. And I've even assumed that you might be able to get them board certified for that, okay? But then I have down to this section that I want to give you some data on contracts and those kind of things. Would you and should you reward for boards? What should you be? Board certified person? Should you be encouraging the group to, the only way to do it is monetary? You're saying yes to that and so on. Huh? What would be your reason? Go ahead.
Just because
It's desirable, and you're rewarded for it, okay? One of the ways groups do it is you just, as soon as they give you the letter, they come in unboarded, as soon as they deliver the administrator a letter on the boards that they boarded, they get from that point on $2,000 more. I'm giving you contractual ways of doing it. Another typical way is not to give them cost of living increases. You might give the ancillary workers cost of living increases, even in tough times like these. And merit increases only on a very limited basis, as you please. But you can probably recruit on the basis of no more than $2,000 annual increase. Even if they're screaming, well, how do I keep up with the cost of living that's already locking in? 2 on 40 is 120 for 5%. Because this used to be figures that continually, and a lot of recruiting continued even when inflation was 10 and 12 and 14%. And then ceilings. They want to know, are there going to be ceilings? If you don't have ceilings, that's a question mark, that's one thing. If you do have ceilings, then they want to know that this continues until that. So if I start at 40, a year later I take my boards, I'm at 42, within a year and a half, I'm now at 44, then in 2 years I'm at 46, say at 2 years, okay? Am I going to be locked up as a family practitioner below internal medicine and peds? Another way that we sometimes do in groups is you give $2,000 for subspecialty boards. The purpose of that is to be able to have amongst the primary care internists one who's got subboards in cardiology, one who maybe has subboards in chest, and you can give them a half a day a week of this, or you at least have the prestige and capability of affording another referral group, even if you're in primary care. I don't know whether this is helpful. I said I discussed some remuneration. If curiosity, debate about some, but this is very low. You understand why we were discussing motivation earlier, right? Think of what if these people are in a community hospital, what they're feeling as they seeing a guy come out of a new school of osteopathy, see, and they have got their boards in family practice. He goes out and takes 1 year in an osteopath's office, now has an internship behind him, doesn't care to go on and take 2 more years, and tells this guy that started at that I cleared 58,000 the first year. This year I'm making 83,000. If I don't break 100 next year, I'm leaving town. Okay? Any impact on this man? No. He isn't as well trained. He doesn't have a background. He holds the EKG upside down when he tries to read it. I mean, there's a lot of problems. These things occur. They occur in real life all the time. Or you're trying to encourage this one, especially internal medicine, who's dealing with elderly patients, to keep them out of bed. He's doing a superb job. And he's saying, the medical associates up the street, they each take the whole morning off in turn. And one of them stays in the hospital all morning. I'm expected to get my rounds over early in the morning, be in the office seeing patients by 9:30 at the latest. Okay? And it's, even though you've set goals, you've set objectives, you're trying to keep people out, yeah, but you tell them that what they can do by over-hospitalization and with poor peer review, with no decent utilization review, which they dominated maybe on the hospital staff, is they come along and they're able to escalate their income on the inpatient side and don't have to worry as much on the outpatient side. Are these all real problems? Anyone want to comment on them? What about a group that's different? Is it likely to face any opposition in the community? And if it does, what forms could such opposition take? What could be done if, in the competitive atmosphere we now have today in medicine, especially?
Are you talking about different than organizations?
Yeah, let's talk about a non-profit, community board run thing with salary-based doctors, somewhere around these numbers. Say all those people are going to be able to earn from $4,000 to $10,000 a year end, depending on some variables of their performance, okay? Sometimes peer review can do it. That's one of the favorite things in a group. In other words, without saying what, one guy makes a beautiful academic contribution, a beautiful daytime job. Another one is perfectly willing to, pediatricians are just doing a gorgeous job at responding at night and keeping the mothers pleased. So they might come in for 6,000 or 8,000. Only a 10,000 might require that in 5 or 6 areas the person knows how to be productive in the group. Now suppose in a community you're coming in with this kind of setup. Could there be any conflict? Is this threatening to the existing numbers? First of all competition is threatening. It's competitions they're looking at. Now they don't get rough if the competition is playing inside the ballpark as they see it, right? Now suppose they want to get rough in unruly competition. What can they do? All this is documented. All this has been spelled out. Have you encountered it before in your courses? What have they done to groups that have done that? How many ways do they have by controlling the system? Make it very rough on you. Huh? How many ways can they show their hostility? Anybody want to lay out a strategy? Start. As young, what might they do? As the existing doctors, what could they do to put a stop to it? And not only competition, they don't like them now. A lot of reasons the way they're
You
organized.
basically have to find another to influence patients not to be able to do practice.
Okay, all right. They can create patient hostility for sure. In other words, in the most informal, now they don't have to sit and plan a way, they send to them any patients who absolutely never pay their bill or nothing but trouble, okay? I mean, they dump on them everywhere in the world. But everyone who comes to them and says, I hear some wonderful things about the new, place down the avenue, and, you're my orthopod, but I'm thinking about switching over to them. I hear some wonderful things about them. I hear some things you've got to worry about. They don't ever say what it is, right? Because they may be all board certified, all university trained, but patient hostility. Remember, I'm separating this from competition. They can do other things with competition. A new OB-GYN man comes into Sparta, North Carolina. Who's been handling Sparta? The family practitioners are doing what? What kind of work are they doing? What part of the OB-GYN's work are they doing? Which part of it? Somebody tell me. Huh? Yeah, they're doing the OB. Now, he's got another half of them. Who's doing that before he gets there? Never been one there before. Never been an OB-GYN in Sparta. What part have they been doing? They've been doing the GYN surgery, okay? Right? This is general surgeons, excuse me. right? General surgeons are doing the GYN. I'm sorry. Got it? That's the town. It's got 5 family practitioners. It's got a general surgeon. And this guy shows up. One they can welcome him. And that happens in many towns, okay? He goes and calls on them. He's personable. Tells them what he's trying to do. And they all think to themselves, well, I'll lose 20% of my OB. Maybe I'll lose 50% of the variables. One guy will say, I wanted to get out of it anyway. Okay? Different variable action. There have been, I'm trying to deal with hostility, so you're not naive about hostility. We haven't even begun what they're going to do to this group to destroy it. Never let it get started. What have they done to just solo practitioners at times who are competitive? What do? They give them a nice interview. We'd like nothing better. They meet. This guy says, this is going to about finish me. 60% of my stuff here, I've been whittling for years. And they all say, George, we ain't going to let you do that. We don't like it anyway, okay? Now it's, very easy. There's no conspiracy to it at all, right? So he goes back home and he mails in his letter, the credentials, right? Who's on the credentials committee at the hospital? It's some of these people, right here, right? Right? It's April. He's told them, gee, guys, I enjoyed visiting with you. I want to move my family in after a month's vacation on August 1 and get going. So he mails them the credentials, right? He writes them a letter about May 15th. Did you get everything I needed? Is there anything else you haven't answered me? No. That's right. Think they have to answer in a hurry? Huh? Okay, now it's June 15th. He's writing some urgent letters. I'm leaving on vacation, I'd like to know. And he calls them. Well, the committee's going to meet on it. They've been very busy on the 18th, right? Now he arrives there, August 1. All these are documented. That's how you cope with the guy, right? Now, how much can an OB-GYN make a living if you can't get in a hospital? How much will it? Huh? Okay? Very different than family practitioner. You can make a fairly good living. You'd like to make more. So, he isn't likely to run to a lawyer, right? He said, well, how about the committee meeting? The committee meets, Jesus Christ, we don't even have a good reference on this second year residency. So on August 31, they write off for that. It sits in somebody's inbox. They don't tell him. See, he said, we still haven't got all your references. He could make a phone call and speed it up. Maybe September 20th, they finally tell him exactly what is holding him up. He says, I'm starving, guys. I signed a 6-month lease with options to sign for 5 more years, and I want to move. Make a long story short, if you think these are exaggerated stories, this is how they have dealt with many of these people who don't know how to move in and move on with a lawyer very rapidly. Like to get an injunction against a credentials committee that's sitting on credentials if he's well trained, okay? And so he packs and leaves, okay? Besides, they haven't exactly called the Medical Society Auxiliary meeting on the Welcome's right. They haven't done any of their norms. They stopped all their meetings. So they don't have to face up to the fact that when he wants to apply to the society, he wants to do any of these things. They cope. Now, what do you think they're going to do here? You think it's going to stop at this? Come on, let's get realistic. There's 3 things any administrator, like any of you might be, have got to face of how they could put you out of business, and you got to guard against every one of them and everybody who's ever organized. Anything pioneering in medicine has historically had to face. And it's only that in modern times these things are becoming more dangerous from the forward. But what is likely to occur to them? What are the 3 things besides that? Strategic things. How do you really cut them off at the knees? McAllister, how can you cut them off at the knees? Let's try it here. What do they need? They're like the other guy. Start with. Huh? Well, you mean if he hired anybody? they might pay more to get him away, but that still isn't as deadly. He might pay more. You know, there may be people that need jobs right now.
What about lab services that you have to send out?
Yeah, but let's start with something else so that they don't get started.
Is Sketch go him? It
Huh?
doesn't have anything to do with him as far as kind
Yeah.
of,
You don't have to-
Well, let me just tell you what's all in the textbooks to begin with. The worst thing, all these are much more difficult than you now. So if you want to say they're historical, say they're historical, but try to understand them because variations can take place. Number one, if he's from Virginia and needs a North Carolina license, they'll move heaven to earth on long distance to see that although his whole schedule requires the July meeting of the board to grant him his license, you see, and that he got in all of his papers in time, somehow somebody moves to delay him. That alone, the guy, the group is left, sitting there paying an internist for 3 months. I mean, they're thrown into a quandary, you see, and he can't get it. He's not licensed, okay? You've payrolled him and he isn't licensed. You understand? This is in every textbook example. The first thing they can do, if they can do anything about licensing, it is more and more difficult because of what you would learn through health law of all the kinds of injunction actions you can bring. You follow me? If you're alert to this. And I'm saying you got to be alert. And they're less likely because they're afraid they have to hold some kinds of meetings or conversations. What's the next way? These are serious things. You see, if you can keep his licensure delayed, anyway. Sure, there's problems with all this unless you do it cleverly, right? But, what if they don't notify him until too late at that July board meeting? That, no way you didn't turn in the correct certificate for your third year of residence. I'm saying, who is the licensing board?
I don't know.
Oh, I let you tell me who you think a licensing board is in medicine. Yeah, it's state, but who sits on it?
nurses and doctors.
Well, I mean, haven't nurses encountered? I mean, is there anybody that hasn't encountered this in some fashion? Okay? It is only an enlightened state that has consumers on its board. People who will raise questions. What in the hell do you think you're doing? You follow me? Or very politely, would you say that again, doctor? I mean, you're from Mount Airy and there's something wrong with this person's credentials in Mount Airy and he's in your specialty. You're the only ophthalmologist in Mount Airy and this young kid wants to... I mean, who is going to raise the question? Did you think doctors raise these questions with each other? They don't. Do you think these are the young, thoughtful doctors that serve on, who would serve on a licensing board? Tell me any young doctor that would accept appointment for a licensing board. He can't afford to give it up, don't you see? It's an honor that you get late in life. You understand? It's the old ducks, the most reactionary, most opposed to progress, serve on licensing boards. So has there been a history of fooling around with everything? What goes on in this state? PAs. North Carolina, maybe PAs are terrible hard time. Okay? Some states, if they academies call for abolishing them, they try to abolish them through this device. In this state right now, the game is that where in most states, if they say the PA is out in the country, 50% of the time in that clinic he's under Dr. A, right, for sponsorship, and 50% under Dr. B, that's fine. He's under their sponsorship. They both laid out a training program and a supervision program, and they accepted it. But not now in North Carolina. This is what the fight's about, you see, in this license. There's always something going on in the licensing force. Okay? They might try to knock the mid-level people out. What else is bread and butter? You've got to do like the OB man. Where do you have to get it? You start in a group. You got to get into what institution? Right. Hospital privileges. And to the extent they can deny them, to the extent they can prevent them. Now, does that mean that happens in every town? Absolutely not. I'm trying to get you to understand the categories of ways that opposition can. And an administrator without eyes in the back of his head is sitting there like a dead duck. I was called in one place in Ohio where a naive, sweet administrator using a slide rule to make all his calculations. And his his planning, didn't get out his clinic and know what was going on, and he never dreamed, why, they would never do this to me. They did all of it to him. He spent all of his capital on law firms fighting off what they were doing to him. Instead of beginning by assuming you'd be a good administrator, paranoid. That's the first quality of a good administrator. Any of you that aren't paranoid, I mean, you know, you're living in a dream world. Okay? You got to be paranoid as to what the system is likely to do if you're trying to do something different. Now, what do you think's the last thing it might be? This is the hardest one now, but not only, as you say, restrain the trade. Very simple. For years, the local county medical society passed over the applications of the food companies. Now you bring a suit on that. In some places, if you won this and if you won that, the administrator leaned back and thanked God and said, my God, if they didn't use medical society membership as a criteria for privileges, what the hell do I care about to pay out $500 a year? You know, to be some fringe benefit I'm going to save, okay? But the other thing that worked in some places is social ostracism. The doctor's wife, some of them are sweet artists who just love to be in the artist colony, and others are nice social climbers who can't wait to be invited by the ladies auxiliary of the medical society. And when they don't invite her, and she says to him, this is the third year we've been here, and they haven't invited me yet. Now go prove restraint of trade. I mean, it's just a bunch of women. Don't invite everybody into the women's club, right?
There's one town that I know of, when a new doctor comes to town, the women in the medical auxiliary call the wife to tell her how she's supposed to dress, how she's seen in the grocery store, and how she's supposed to behave.
You know, I would feel that your judgment of me as a paranoid doesn't bother me. Okay? I confess to it. I can't be a good administrator out of me alone. But it is nice to know that somebody else knows that all of this can go on, okay? And that the smaller the town, the meaner it is, okay? The larger the community, in a big triangle, it becomes, don't you see, rather unsophisticated. All this can be done like small towns can run the personnel, you know? And that's what they do, okay? They can do it in so many ways. Did you ever look at the border of this state and in many other states? I mean, Charlotte sits there, depending on counties in South Carolina, right? Sparta sits there, living off of more Virginia residents than North Carolina residents for its traffic. A bunch of Roanoke Rapids sits, you know, I mean, you look at the kinds of ways in which you can handle licensing, you can play games, you know. And partly, none of this will apply, and you usually won't be in trouble unless you're messing with Big John, which could be the nickname of some senior doctor who's not going to allow anybody to compete with him. If you're not into that setting, you know, or if you're not trying something pioneering. And pioneering can be, you know, all over the law. I'm meaning it generally to mean. Thank you.
These are things, though, traditionally have used against black physicians trying to establish practices in small southern towns. I mean,
I think they have been.
Understood that happens.
I think it's understood that it happens to blacks. It's understood that, you know, it can happen in Roanoke Rapids to union organizers in a more violent way. You know, it can happen to anybody that's a dissenter. But it is hard to realize in a noble profession that the history is loaded. I don't know whether you all, you know, at some of the courses you've already had, have, for instance, read the readings in medical care out of the Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan, which has 3 whole chapters just on the devices used to destroy the group practices in western Pennsylvania and Ohio as they began, and the varied responses of the groups. Some groups have spent all their building money, all their construction money to get a new building on lawsuits to try to fight off licensure, fight for licensure, and to fight for hospital privileges. And that's why tactically you've got to make decisions as an administrator. Like, if you assume they might try this, then there are ways of threatening them quietly in advance. You know, like finding out who is real Big John in this community. It may be the vice president of the bank. And just telling him that one of the tactics is, there isn't any way we're going to bring a lawsuit against any doctors on a credentials committee. It isn't worth the time of day, but you are on the hospital board, and please notify your board that you're going to become famous in history. You have a funny name, Drombowski, and it's going to be Jones, our doctor, versus Drombowski, and it's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court, because we're going to sue the living devil out of you for using the hospital board to allow doctors, to function on a credentials committee in an irresponsible way. And that sometimes ends the whole thing. I mean, he calls up the doctor. One afternoon in a place where we did this, they did the ridiculous thing that was almost laughable. You pulled off notifying Big John what would happen to him if he messed with him. The hospital administrator, who up to then had held up privileges for 10 months, called the group administrator to say, we want to be sure we have all our applications because we want to vote on them tonight. This is within 24 hours. So he says, well, Dr. So-and-so just came into town. That means they don't know who he is and haven't got a reference on him. So he flies into town. He gets off, out of his car. He goes in the clinic. You go over and get an application. He fills it out. They don't know whether he's really who he is. They haven't checked out whether he's really a licensed doctor. They really don't know whether he ever had a residency or whether he's qualified to do surgery. And that night they vote him privileges too, because that's how scared they are. Now that's when paranoia pays off. You follow me? You're so far ahead of them that you know who the establishment is, and you split it. Now, is none of this pertinent to today, when hospitals are intending to declare war on doctors in practice, and doctors in turn are going to declare war on practice? You see, I mean, the politics of all this is going to be foremost. These, the analyses by Pete Warwick Witchell are very low-key, slow-spoken descriptions of just what's going to happen as they tighten up on certain surgical procedures that can be done outpatient. When they stop paying hospitals per diem, just think about that a minute. If you are a hospital administrator, you've been used to for 10 years being paid nicely by Medicare. With all you screaming, the resolutions were really gimmicks. You really have been paid nicely by Medicare, and it's all over now. It's diagnosis-related groups. And by the end of this year, the Federal Register will publish a list of between 200 and 400 outpatient surgical procedures in which no surgeon will receive more than 60% of his fee if he does them in your hospital. And you better know everybody's tactics better start moving, In other words, the crunch is moving in, and one way you could put it to a group that's rather conservative, say a single specialty group, if this is what could happen to you under President Reagan, use your imagination, gentlemen, about being without a professional administrator as to what could happen to you under the next Democratic president with a Democratic Congress, in clamping down. If you don't have tactics, if groups don't have farsightedness, for survival, such as aggressively moving on surgery centers or whatever is possible. I've omitted from all these kinds of structures HMO clinics deliberately, and want you, when the HMO presentation takes place on March 14th, after the break, to ask the questions about HMO clinics of the group presenter. See, one of them is an IPA presenter, the Independent Practice Associations. The other is the group practice presenter, so that you might ask any questions you have. You might even find out some things that would certainly show you that all my numbers are not wrong but are different in California. You don't imagine you can hire anybody but Kaiser with the numbers I put on the board, do you? You ask a person, perhaps that's doing the group presentation, what do doctors cost in California, if he knows, And I would think the market out there is so extremely high that they in some way compromise with that market, And if they have to start them at 80,000, they start them at 80,000. I have left those people out I would like to deal now with some of the fringes to be sure you have them, when you have them in your mind. Under fringes, do you all know the differences besides life insurance, group health insurance that can be given a doctor, disability insurance, things that are tax-free to a doctor and therefore very important? Those three for sure. Then time offs for sure, and the time offs should include vacation time, paid vacation, paid study time annually to go to approved study meetings, and a contract should never fail to use certain words that you all as administrators can enforce. If I throw out words like this, you have to be sure you define your terms or they jump away from you. For instance, unless you've been out there in practice, you don't realize if it says study time, that you sooner or later are going to encounter the two guys I encountered. One put in, until we changed the bylaws quickly, to attend the stamp collectors meeting of physicians in this country for a week in Hawaii. And one put in for, although he did no, he was a sort of lunatic who owned a private plane and had come down twice on the interstate highway there, which was not well traveled, in losing his bearings, but he loved to fly, so he put in twice for aviation medicine. After the first one, we asked him what was he going to use it for that would ever help the group. He was in internal medicine. Everyone else was going to, the old joke is that never let your group get past 7, because when it gets to 8, you're going to find 1 8-ball. Well, I've found that rule is very good. And if you get to 16, if you have less than 2 8-balls, you're a miracle. I mean, it'll pull something on you out of this work. So after the first time, he said he was going to try to get the bunch together at the small little airports around there and do their annual physicals. That never turned out to be true, so that we had to abolish it when he put in for the second one. But you see, when you don't have rule approved, it's just all you need, and then you take it to the medical director and disapprove. You have to work closely with the medical director. Now, if it's a doctor-owned group, who would you think's in charge when you're working with a medical director? Any question? If it's a non-profit sponsored group, does it mean the opposite necessarily? That the administrator is in charge? No, the doctor might be a formidable leadership figure. I have worked with doctors whom I was very happy to be in a colleague and learning relationship with. I mean, they really were dedicated, they could be alone. The rest of the group could maybe barely understand the objectives and the goals. There were neutrals on them. There were no liberals. There were no dissenters. That one person knew how to conduct himself in a leadership way that no raise enough issues in these meetings. I will take them before the board. I represent you. And at the same time turning around and putting peer pressure on them. But, there are a few of you. I don't want to look at the clock. I don't want to talk about that. But, this drifting in after 10 o'clock in the morning, just taking off shopping. What any good nurse administrator has had to do with home health nurses. This being in shopping centers and public knowing it between 2 and 4 p.m., it's from Nowheresville, without permission, without trading, without compensatory time arrangements. This is a hell of a thing in a small town. I mean, anybody in leadership knows the way you handle personnel is as smoothly as you can, but you got to come down on equities or you have no reputation for fairness. I want to deal now, besides insurances and time off, and see if you understand who would like to speak. Perhaps Ms. Cohen, about Keogh plan versus corporate pensions. Whatever you might know about either one of those. Anything? Okay. Anyone who does feel they have a grasp of those as fringe benefits? Would you like a presentation quickly of them? All right. Let me give you why they're very significant for doctors and why they're in change right now. They're in change that you must know about to deal with. Why did doctors incorporate, even single doctors, was for pension plan and profit sharing plan benefits, okay? And what can they set aside right now? Anybody know? Right through 83. Or as high as, and I don't remember the dollars, $46,000 a year. That's what they're incorporating now. Are you clear as a bell? Everybody's got a little PC now out in front, and some of them are so silly. You know, doctors are silly about it. They don't have administrators. I mean, they don't understand that, say, IMC doesn't have to be as big as their name. No corporation would think about doing that, right? Can you imagine? I mean, General Motors, you know it as General Motors, and then way down there, like a trademark, it says Inc., right? Not a doctor. You ever watch him? I mean, if you incorporate some of them, go look at their signs. They just tell the sign painter, I am now, Fathead Shrink, MD Inc. And S stands Inc. in as big a letters as his name, right? I mean, it doesn't have to. It could be PC as tiny as you could read it, a PA as tiny, whatever the thing is, right? But they got them. They got them all over the place, whether they're fruits. Here's the reason. This is a terrific maximum. It was so serious compared to, this is corporation pension plans proposition, to an earlier piece of legislation designed for all professionals. Both of these apply to attorneys, anybody in business, consultants, engineers, MDs, right? The whole works. TO began with $2,500 a year, went to $7,500 a year from 1974 to 81, and only now, in 83, has reached $15,000. Okay? This means, in dollars, yeah, it's 15% of your income. I'm trying to show you max why high earners. A lot of doctors didn't incorporate. They're not high earners, okay? This is for high earners. A guy would not incorporate, say, who made $60,000 and who at 15% is setting aside $9,000 because he could right now. Why pay unemployment compensation taxes, workman's compensation tax? Why pay a lawyer to incorporate? There's going to be some costs over the years. I'll show you the balances in a few minutes, okay? But I want you to see the pressures in the new legislation. Now this is new. This is where they were, okay? They upped it to this maximum. This is 15% or that. Over here, it can be as high as 25%. I want to show you, too, if you organize a non-profit. Some of the non-profit administrators are not very well informed, and they don't know what they can do for their people. So they put them under TO at 15%, see? Or they incorporate the doctors and then say, but all we can afford to give you is 8%. You follow me? They keep them in very firm limits. There are ways of playing around, which I'll show you in a few minutes over here, that can make it very valuable for a doctor and tempting into a non-profit in more stringent. But this is the reason. This is the maximum. The law last year, is nicknamed TEFRA. It's the 82 tax law. Okay? Under TEFRA, the 82 tax law, they got very heated about the fact that professionals got this much. This is money escaping taxes. You understand? This is money that normally in a 50% tax bracket, the government is losing billions of dollars on. So what did they decide to do? Remove it as a benefit? No, they put a limit. Anybody know the dollar limit? $30,000. Now the AMA has a lobby trying to remove that limit right now. Okay? Now that limit compares to this limit of $15,000. Okay? But you have some expenses when you incorporate. What kind of expenses? Sure. Oh yeah, it's an expense. Yeah, right. Whatever it is, $46,000. It's treated just like rent. It comes right out of gross, and therefore is a saving to the doctor in tax, a pure saving to the doctor in tax, and that's the reason for incorporation. Now when it was If there's this plus this, he then discounted the following costs. He reviewed them. There used to be lists of advantages and disadvantages. We used to go over with them. Now, what were those things? There would be the costs of incorporation, meaning a lawyer creating. There would be the troubles, slight amount of trouble in incorporating. You have to name who is on the board of directors of your corporation, your wife, your cousin, your lawyer, your accountant, right? And they have to meet and create minutes. Sometimes they don't have to meet. You just have a secretary who knows what she's going to create the minutes, and they all sign off on them as if they did meet. But there's some little problem. That's the small part of it. Then depending on the jurisdiction you're in, how the corporation is treated, you can have a number of double accords that add up. First of all, if you're in business for yourself, that's what this is, right? This is non-incorporated, non-corporation, okay? You can set aside 15%. You really don't have much structure. You just fill out a Schedule C of your costs against your income. It's there. It's done. And you could set aside less. Now let's look over here at what you got to do. The most you have to do over here is pay the self-employment what? Self-employment, Social Security, old age benefit rate. What do you have to do over here? He is Dr. Smith, and he works for the Dr. Smith Corporation, right? You have to play both parts. He has to play the employee and the employer, which is now, say, 7.15 or something like that, or 6.95. Double it for me, instead of 9% up here. So he's weighed all this because of this. So I went to a meeting week before last in Atlanta, just where these people were, describing all the impact of Medicaid, and then we're getting tremendous amount of questions from the doctors, doctor groups, you see, on the impact on them of these variables. So that this is Social Security old age benefit tax. That does cost money, more than that, okay? Obviously, total, up to the total, it's taxed now, $40,000 I think, okay? What else might they have to pay in taxes? Anybody know? Compensation, depending on the jurisdiction you're in. Unemployment compensation tax, right? Federal and state here. Again, you must know states. I'm not trying to tell it to you for every state. It will vary by jurisdiction. Okay? What you have to pay. So there's a bundle of dough tied up in making this amount, being able to set this aside, okay? Say 6,000, 8,000, I'm not, okay, some amount. The meetings probably were a good sample in a not a very large, auditorium or anything. Intimate enough group of people asking questions and brainstorming, very plainly, very feeling. It was a good sample for me for the Southeast. They were over 13 simultaneous meetings all over the country with people. That they're in a dilemma, and their attorneys are in a dilemma. And they're liable to do nothing, both groups, for now. The reasons are as follows. I haven't done with this. Gradually, this is going to get better. As I understand it, this is going to move up to 30,000, 19, I don't know, it's in the law, 85 or something like that, okay? So you notice the equalization? And then they're going to both run along with COLA, with the cost of living increase. They're both going to get COLA increases. So that the real issue for both groups now, the reason they may not move is that this year they're not under this limit yet. So they either hope the AMA lobby will remove it, see they're sitting still waiting for that, or they'll hope it'll remove it in 84, 85, or it won't be until then that they might decide, well, hell, if they're equalized then we'll unincorporate them. They'll still always own that. You understand? Think of a doctor's position. He owns $250,000 invested, and the named beneficiary, he's the only employee of it himself. Now, was that the law? Do you think he could make himself the only beneficiary of his own pension plan? Do you think he could? He's in an office with a nurse, a receptionist, a cleaning woman, and a clerk. Could he do
There
that?
have to be some rules about note. The other employees may have to be employed a certain period of time.
That's right.
But after
Right.
a certain period of
Yeah.
time, they do have to receive
Right.
benefits.
There are more costs under both of these, okay? There are more costs under both of these because you cannot totally discriminate against your employees. But there's very open discussion when you attend meetings like this of how, the way the phrase is usually from the floor. The people up in front know how to word it so sophisticatedly that they are really discussing some exclusionary section of section so-and-so, right? And then somebody says, I don't understand that. Is that the part of the thing where we keep the rank and file from getting any pensions? And now the question's out in the open. That's exactly the question. Okay, how do you keep the rank and file from getting any pensions? Well, how do you think you go about it? You first of all are allowed a lot of things under the IRS, under their the kingpins here. So equality doesn't mean equality, really. The first thing the IRS says, you can say, it takes 3 years of employment to come under the pension plan. So that even though we're setting aside money for you, he's in an office, you think they've got a union or anything, right? They just work for him. If he lets the nurse go at 2 years and 9 months, if the cleaning woman quits to follow her husband to another job at 2 years, and if the receptionist gets pregnant and he doesn't bring her back after maternity leave and, no problems with it, then he hasn't got anybody in the plan, right? And another thing is that the cleaning woman at that point is moved to 30 hours a week. She's not full-time anymore. He's handled all his problems. He's got a lawyer to tell him how to do all the things, okay? So that all I'll tell you is, you sit in a room during these discussions, it's rather obvious what the nature of it is, you see. Then it gets very nitty-gritty. We've got a group of 8 radiologists, so we're not talking about 4 people. We got about 44 people. We're having these kind of mountain problems, and then some guy up front explains, well, equality doesn't mean equality. It can be a fixed. It has 2 kinds of benefits. I'll go into this in a minute. I don't want to lose it. You know what this maximum was for? A fixed contribution. In other words, he decided to put into his personal account a fixed contribution that he pulled back some money. Not a fixed pension. A fixed pension could have been the amount of money needed to get $800 a month, right, for life, at, say, age 55 on, if he's 30 years old. It's a fixed contribution amount, so he can have a lot of money in no time at that rate. He's earning it, money market rates and corporate bond rates, even conservatively. It doesn't take for 3-4 years at this kind of rate, you see. The other employees, if there's going to be any contribution put in, can be moved to other kinds of ways. They can afford, in a sense. In other words, he's not giving it all away. He's in a sense saying, are you willing to match it? Well, they can't afford to match it, so that they come down very narrowly anyway. They're only going to get small pensions. All of that is taken into account in saying it's better to do it this way, even with the costs of employee pensions. Okay? And they exist over here in the same kind of IRS business enforcement. They do not that tightly. Now, why do they like this better? For another reason. Any of you know the Keogh rules? There's something like IRA rules. You must draw the money out between age 59 and a half and 70. You always see those big IRA ads. They're the same thing. Okay? So that there's rules apply to this that don't apply over here. Here he could decide to quit practice at age 55, and leave all the money in and live off of something else for a while. He doesn't have anything that makes him have to draw it out at a given time. None of the HEO rules apply to this. Almost his board could meet and make any rules as long as they apply to everyone participating. Now, I didn't discuss the nonprofits, but they come under a thing called 403B of the Internal Revenue Act. And what you can do for a nonprofit is as follows. And some of the nonprofits, unfortunately, don't know enough about all the ways they can help their employees. You can, one way or another, by private letter and contract, with employees, say the administrator of a home health agency, say the administrative staff, keep them happy in the mental health center, anything nonprofit that you're connected with, you can pull off about 20% away, and put it away for them. Now, there's a lot of ways you could do it. You could give them 20% of whatever salary they're at, or let's say the person's at $50,000. Let's follow this logic. You can have a plan by which you say whatever any employee cares to contribute tax-free from his wages, between 0 and 5%. Now make it for the whole agency, the whole community health center and mental health. Between 0 and 5, whatever he cares to put in, we will match 3 times over. Now let's watch the $50,000 guy. He's a $50,000 administrator. He puts up 5%, $2,2500. You put in $7,500, $10,000 set aside for him. And an annuity, you could pick something like TIAA that's around university. You could pick any comparable. You could get an insurance company would give him, if he's young. See, you can have each person have a different choice. Each person could have 10 options as to what they want to invest in a fast growth situation, in a very conservative thing if they're older, put aside for a pension. But it is possible to have benefits that are sometimes omitted. We meet with many nonprofits and they not know what to do with their doctors. They don't realize they don't have to be in a separate organization. We can do a lot for them without being able to, and they don't bump into any of these things. They don't bump into a lot of audits. All these are heavily audited and watched. All this, there's a lot of suspicion in IRA, this monkey business, that's all this. Over here, this is a nonprofit, say some nonprofits have had their doctors separately out there as contractors, so they have to go through POs and don't realize that it can be at 20% of salary. That's true, this kind of money isn't equal to $15,000, but neither is that kind of guy making it, where 15% would be more than $7,500. So if you use the PO. $2,500 now, you see escape taxes too. It became a tax-free contribution, so he doesn't pay taxes. So it's a benefit to him in addition as a match. If I confused you too much, I'm trying to just set a series of remunerations, ranges, other things, and I'm warning you to ask about each one of them. You'll find that, especially in a very business-like run ones like Kaiser, will be very competitive. I'm trying to cut corners, very demanding and very good doctor leadership. I think we're getting the breakup time, so anyone have any criticism or suggestions? And I wanted to tell you one other thing if you'll tell the others. I went down and met with Healthy Trot and another outfit and have decided to, first of all, I guess someone's asked me, son, I don't want to make a statement on the thing. I want you to understand why there's any problem for me. I have zero budget for this course. You understand that? All the long-distance calls are on me personally, getting speakers and calling up IOUs. I have zero services over here, as I have zero office, to meet with you in. And Of course, the school, after inviting me to do the course and all, then announced that they had lost all of their funding and therefore there wouldn't be any pay for teaching the course. So I just wanted you to understand, without it being a sad story, why I'm unable to do any more than finance what I've been able to do so far. But when I went down and saw what they wanted, you know, for a small group, and I talked to one or two people that would prefer not to put out, I'm going to try to see what I can do to Xerox more and to stay, you know, in as many substitute ways, or to give you the readings. Roma remains, if the text is around the library, an excellent one, the Dr. Rosenfeld list I gave you. And you can roam around in it, and I'll tell you where I'll be in the next few things. I reviewed it last time, so next time I think I've tried to stay with this kind of thing. If we've left off Medicaid mills, you know that anything we've just described could have been Medicaid mills. If we leave off something like restrictive covenants, you know, I'll deal with those next. I'll pick them up, you know, as I told you, through here. Next time I'm going to try to deal with a whole bunch of the non-profit kind of structures and organizations, like the variety of federal beneficiaries that we skipped over, the varieties of specialized clinics, the varieties of private ones in Appalachia and in certain industries. Some of the dynamics. I got rid of remuneration ranges this time. And then I want to end next time's session with some general data, and I'll give you some readings to take with you for the 2-week break period about HMOs generally, okay, prior to the speakers. And then we have speakers for a couple of times before, or 3 times actually in a row, in a variety of ways. And in one of those we'll take up PAs, mid-level people, the one after Dr. Shep speaks, and the whole corporatization process. He'll deal with it in one way, but we'll expand on it. And on April 11, I'll get back to the mixed bag of stuff, but try to focus by then, hopefully, very much on the kind of personnel and maybe collective bargaining issues that, from a practical point of view, you don't bump into anywhere else in school or in any other courses. And if you have any criticism or suggestions as to you know, what the material is that we're handling to keep it from being repetitive of other things, I hope we're expanding on or giving you new insights into some of the areas that you may have covered in other places before. But when not, I want to know about it. And I still urge any of you that need to tighten up an outline with me or anything that probably over half the class by now is preparing or has finished outlines all about what they're going to be doing, so that from here on in they can begin to, you know, have more focus. And I'd urge that as many of the rest of you move along in that direction. Thank you for your time and attention again. Distractions on prescriptions. Those are reminders for me, and there'll be some, at least one handout, more than one handout during the thing.
Yes. Right, it's 25. And there's another black nurses in Winston-Salem State. Well, no, it's not, but it's kept black. They do have some high students, but 3 nurses have done some black.
Because we got a lot of territory to cover.
But I have cousins who would like to learn.
In case there's some additional people coming in, I'm going to break to make some other comments that will affect everybody. But what I want to do is indicate that today's session, we're continuing to cover a variety of ways in which organized ambulatory healthcare settings exist. And some more of the continuum of group practice issues with some, just to give you an idea what the hour will consist of. The last part of the hour will be getting you ready for the HMO people next time, okay? Giving you a general background on HMOs and being sure that you have a grounding from your other readings on the basics of the HMO stuff. So that'll be the last hour. Up until then, I want to get on to some additional organized ambulatory care and group settings. I want to move from that to some very nitty-gritty stuff, like we were taking up the last 45 minutes or so last time, about group practices. You remember we even got into the range of fringe benefits, compensation, tax benefits, that kind of thing. We'll have that recurring, I told you, right through that April 11th thing, okay? There's a spread out here that's being broken up by speakers who can come at certain times, like HMO, rather than having the group practice occurring in a socket of three continuing sessions at the same time. So I want to get on this stuff because of the amount of territory we have to cover. And remind you of what we've done to now. We've covered fairly heavily in an odd way, without identifying it that way, the outpatient, the emergency room, the ambulatory care around hospitals. We've not even hit very hard at all on Department of Health, and you're going to see we're picking it up today in part by taking up categorical things that they do. We have hit extremely light. I'm just describing where we're not doing it, trying to get heavy on schools and what they do, but they occur again in two of the areas we're going to take up later today. And we've done very light on industry. I'm now speaking not of likening a specific thing we'll take up later today, industry sponsored, say HMO, but rather on the organized ambulatory care. I think you understand you have gotten a lot of material from which you can think through hospital-based stuff because of and I kept pointing out to you that it's a tail end of the dog. The more you'll ever work in hospitals, the more you'll realize this, that it's not always treated with the respect or with the focus that you get from a freestanding point. You've had large attempts up to this point to most settings of a group practice character, private and non-profit. Today I want to move, you see, sort of to some governmental ones, okay? If anyone wants to, and you're free to interrupt me at any point if this isn't true, we're going to continue to give you more and more bits and pieces on both these. We've even taken off for an entire session on neighborhood health centers, a whole year of federal support, what that thrust left behind it, and the impact on people. And we've been on to migrants. We've been on to things I'm not even trying to name here. A lot of the varieties of things. Okay, now I want to move over. Nothing of this was written with the idea that you could read my hymn section and make the notes from. This is to remind me of what I want to say, okay? Because I got some other things to give you as handouts that are not on this. So what I'm saying now is not going to be given to you. We're going to deal with government. This is what I say is behind us. We're going to deal now with sort of government-organized ambulatory health care services, some financed by the government, but in some cases straight with government running it, and some by non-profit sponsorships. And we're going to not get on very much at this point to state and locals. We're going to deal more jump to federals, and you'll hit state and locals more categorically, okay? And I will give you some stuff on them. This is the part. Is my outline. I'm not going to cover with a piece of writing for you, okay? I'm going to try to create a... So let's just review them briefly, and I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I want to be interrupted with questions or comments, disagreements, or, any elaboration or anything. And don't allow anything I'm saying to stop you from interrupting what's going on. First, you take, the military. What's significant about it, it's a worldwide system. Second thing is it's a totally salaried system. Nothing we've said about incentives, nothing of that. Now, does that mean the military is stupid? No. We all know the modifications they make. They will offer tremendous bonuses like they do, just as they do to enlisted men if they're short. At times of doctor shortages, they'll pay $9,000, $12,000, $15,000, reimbursement stuff to see you keep them in if they're 9 years about to drop out of pension. They know if they'll stay 3 more or 12, they'll think about 20 years, that kind of thing. But they're salaried, okay? In the continental U.S., the only figures we have, last I can find, of the 75, there are 35 million outpatients encounters, okay? It's a large system. That's excluding Champus. That's excluding the whole dependency program. Okay, that's an insurance program. Anyone want to raise their hand? Either tell me they don't know what Champus is. Anybody doesn't know what it is? All right, somebody want to explain what's Champus? Who wants to go? Person wants to know what Champus is. What is it? And it's a pure insurance program that may even work with blues, and they work with what? It has a variety of contractual money, maybe by states. So it is an insured program. There's no system to it that we have to be concerned with. You can go to private doctors. About one half of those 35 million, 18 million are estimated to be outside the hospital system of the military. And in the military, the Army is the highest number. That's just 10 districts per annum. And the lowest are the Air Force and the Navy with 8.5, which is what relationship to civilian encounters is. What is that? Is that less? And larger in what ratio would you guess? Yeah, that's a fair thing. It's close to twice as large. Generally speaking, all of the NIH and other studies would indicate about 5 outpatient visits a year for the American population as a whole. What reasons might the military? Might there be more numbers here? Aside from the fact that everybody in the government might be exaggerating the numbers, right? Just to do okay. But what reasons? What? It's free. But let's go beyond it. Who are they now? Don't forget who they are, okay? So what? There's all kinds of things going on. I mean, there can be injuries yeah, go ahead. No, let's get it. Let's get it out on the table, everything. That's right. It can be the end of the weekend, right? I mean, they have all kind of, they impose a lot of these visits themselves and then record them, right? They have all kind of BD inspections and all this kind of thing, and then that's more visits, right? We're not saying where these take place. I told you half are outside of the hospital. No, this is just I can read it. 8.5 to 10 visits per annum. 8.5 to 10. The low, the 10 is the Army, the largest thing.
And that's worldwide.
Yeah, so worldwide. No, the data we have. It is not, the Army simply doesn't release it enough to, figure it out. You understand, there are some of these are bound to be dependents. It's excluding Champus. It's not saying that in some of these continental places there aren't wives or children coming in to see them. It's a blurry statistic, but if it is larger in any way, suppose it's not twice as large as 50% larger, it would be the nature of the military. They're in isolation. There's reasons for going on sick call, right? You get a 30-mile hike in the morning, and they line up, 20% of the unit trying to, find a reason not to be on a 30-mile hike. There can be all kind of reasons, okay? Drug abuse in Vietnam can cause constant, shipping them in for inspection. We don't know how much of this is imposed by, military disciplinary things. How much is the isolation of the military, so that they're isolated in foreign places with a variety of reasons. Veteran system. Anybody want to add anything to the military? These are systems that the Federals have. It's again a salaried system, okay? The last numbers we have are for 79, 15 million outpatient visits. We have no way, they do not tell us how many of those occur outside of hospitals in any kind of their clinic structures or outside of hospitals. What the estimates of some experts are that might be as much as 20% of them are occurring outside of their own 172 hospitals, which have 85,000 beds. Okay. We do know they're an aging population. At the time of a few years ago, at this data, over 40% of those outpatient visits were people over 55. We do know that, like the military, whether you would have to say, do they regard this as their primary care source? Any question? The military hasn't got any choice? That's its primary care source. I mean, that is what gets it if you said, where do you rely on to get medical care, wouldn't they answer their own clinics and their own hospitals, right? I mean, they don't go outside, right? The military themselves. We're a larger percentage than you would believe. A very significant percentage of the veterans on interview, this is from interviews, the VA doesn't release much, but it's outside studies occasionally, would indicate 25, 30% maybe regarded as their primary place to get medical care. Okay? And so it's become a place for, you might say, lower income veterans. Okay? The numbers vary, 17, 20, 25, 30, different studies come up. And if anyone wants to talk about any of this, what do you think happens when what's going on right now is going on? Layoffs, unemployment. What do you think happens to this system? Huh? Yeah, anyone want to comment on it? You were in the VA hospital. Anyone else in the VA hospital? What do you see over there? What's happening? Did we go over there in a recession year like last year?
There's an over usage of outpatient.
A tremendous increase. Okay, so 82. You just have layoffs in an area like we have around, and North Carolina's not going to be a good example. If you imagine the Michigan VA, facility there, they ship in doctors from elsewhere to try to even keep up with the demand. If they try to keep up with it, okay, it means that these are people who would normally use their private insurance, would normally go to other facilities. They're without it now. They've expended everything. They're out on one company. It's a system that can turn it. I think the rules are such that they almost can't turn them down if a person with a non-service connected disability shows up for our care.
There was something passed, I think about a couple of years ago, about the use of the outpatient facilities and requiring veterans and different certain non-citizens.
Yeah, that's what.
Required to those positions.
Well, what are the rules? Have to show their insurance card if they have any?
I think they were encouraged to go to the private position.
Okay, so they weren't mandated to
No,
go
it
to
wasn't.
Yeah. I don't think you can do much about them. You can ask them, do you have private insurance? And if so, then you can take down all the data and try to, and then they have a poor system of billing, I would say, and they're doing well, but I don't know, collecting, so that they try to ship them out, but they can't push them.
I was wondering about, I applied up here to get work done at the dental clinic, through dental school, and so far I hadn't been chosen, so I was thinking about going to the VA hospital to get my dental work done there.
I can't ask you. I don't know what, I don't even, do they have a dental unit in the VA in Star?
Because there's no reason I don't see how they could refuse.
Well, if you're the person that spent 6 months there, any reason they could find to refuse?
Yeah.
You stand there, I
Well, the
don't
other-
see how many classes you have to sit there and wait.
Really? That's the
Yeah,
problem.
okay.
Only other thing I was going to say, that I know when I was in the veteran hospital up in Salisbury, there's a thing they would say it was a seasonal type of thing, where guys from up north would come down, would migrate down. They would have seasonal changes. They would come in, they would hit the place during the winter, because they had free food, a warm place to stay, and all that. And that's how they did it, because they make circuits around the country.
I'm moving. Any other comments? That's veteran. Indian population. There are somewhat over 800,000 Indians in 24 states. In 78, there were over 3 million outpatient encounters, besides 1 million dental encounters. All of their 51 hospitals, remember some of them are terribly small. Anybody have any idea what a small Indian hospital is? What would you say compared to a small civilian hospital? What's a small civilian hospital? 50 beds? What do you think? Huh? 100 beds is small civilian. That could be your definition. It could be a, huh?
You say how small?
Yeah, how small would you say? What? Yeah, well, you go down to 5. And they have hospitals with 5, which is quite a bit of staffing, quite a bit of ancillary relations out of employee relationships with that. Down to 5. Still run labs, still got to run X-ray, still got to, carry a lot going there, or if there's going to be deliveries, depends on what you're able to take in that time. largest one isn't 200 there. Is the present administration working this over? Yeah, much harder, and they'll work that over. But both of them have lobbies or political reasons why you have to. They don't touch. Remember, is the present administration going to cut anything underage, the military? Anyone believe they're going to do anything to cut that? No, they're going to increase it. Okay? They're going to do anything to try to cut both of these? Yes. They're going to back off from it? Yes. Okay. You understand the reasons? You look like you're pretty. You robbed the goddamn country from the people. You get $24 a gallon, and now you come along and take away the treaty rights to medical care, right?
You call them socialists?
Yeah, that's right. And then you have a Secretary of Interior who says the whole Indian service is an example of. Russia is no example, he says, of anything. The real example of socialism is the Indian service and how badly it works. Okay? Exactly. You got these numbers coming across 51 hospitals. They're about 50-50 occurring out on those 99 field stations. Some of them are very tiny. They're field stations and they're excellent clinics and they're full-time doctors scattered all over. I don't know whether any of you have ever visited, but if you're out west and you like the Rocky Mountains, they'll usually host you and they'll be very nice. There's some gorgeous, I'm not talking about the Grand Canyon, but some very much nice canyons on the Grand Canyon where Indians live. And there are very few people, trotting where there's excellent small Indian service clinics, okay? This is the big thing that the Reagan administration is trying to wipe out is the public health service, so that this then had to be separated out as he tried to abolish the entire public health service, you see, because these were public health service officers. They've been preserved as Indian public health service officers. I don't know what the cutbacks are. Some of you may know, yes. This was the Cherokee Reservation, Western North Carolina. Where is their hospital located? In Cherokee itself. Okay. How many hospitals is it? Does that mean their business office was functioning better than from what you observe it, or do you?
Was it functioning?
No, I mean, did it appear to be billing? What, they don't have much you can bill, do they?
I don't see how in the world they could be self-supporting without this.
No, I mean, most of them, but they usually leave the reservations and don't use this system. When they leave a Western reservation, they go to work in San Francisco construction work, under another contract on the system. You see, they drift out of the system. Okay. You also have to understand the mobility of some of this population. The Indians you see in Cherokee are stationary. The ones in the west are nomadic, some of them. So that, let's take one of the largest ones in Nevada. They keep a base of 12 people somewhere, I can't remember, near Tooele, maybe 50 miles out of Tooele, which is a little west of Salt Lake City. And then the rest of that tribe of several thousand graze their sheep into Utah. And you have to fly in helicopters to keep field stations there for that grazing season. So the Indian Health Service has to do imaginative things because of the fact that some of these people are nomadic. To understand the reason they keep 12 back there is very important. They can represent the other several thousand that are on the drift or whatever it is they've taken from them. Mineral values they can get with that. They'll sign 2,000 acres. Nobody argues with it. Okay. This is one, I'm showing the results of the present. This is one that was going downhill. The main Here again was the first public health service hospital in the U.S. for merchant seamen. How old are they? Anybody have an idea? Who are merchant seamen? Quick definition. What's a merchant seaman by definition?
It's like Coast Guard, maybe.
The Coast Guard could use their hospitals, but that's not. No, the Navy is up here. And the Coast Guard happened at one time to be able to use those hospitals. They're unimportant.
Weren't they were like from one time ago, like the late 70s.
The important thing is, yeah, that's right. They're the oldest system we have. They were established in 1798. And what are merchant seamen? They were for the British, the heartland of their country, and for us they were. At one time, these are the employed seamen who are not part of any military operation, who work on ships that carry, the cargo. So for many nations, including ours, why would the merchant seamen in numbers have gone downhill? And in turn, their whole system has gone down. What's happened to this? It's gone under foreign flag, you see what I mean? In other words, there's very few U.S. There's a large Russian fleet out there carrying, merchant cargo. There's a large British fleet out there. There's a large what? What do our U.S. companies use? There are some countries that you would never think of as having large merchant fleets.
Well, the Greeks.
Huh?
The Greeks.
Greeks. What we do is lease them. See, all this, we talk about multinational stuff, it all began years ago. Honduras has an enormous, Guatemala, you follow me? Any government that we think we can hit on, or something, we lease. We give them a $50 million ship, you then lease it back, 100% rights to use it, okay? To haul your oil, to haul your stuff. The result has been they got rid of the union contracts, they got rid of the obligations, they got rid of the American workers. Okay? You're down to almost no, and some people are very scared about this, but I'm trying to show what happened. That when the Reagan administration proposed the closing of these, this was a very easy thing to accomplish because that was a terribly declining in numbers that reached zero. Prisons, they're used going into them, I'm guessing. I don't know the current data population in federal prisons. I'm not talking about when most prisoners are. Most prisoners are in state prisons, okay? Something on the order of 25,000. They might have 28 hospitals, all of which have clinics. Again, remember these numbers? Well, the military, as much in the Army as 10 visits per annum. In a prison, this would be extremely high visits per annum, okay? The reasons would be, again, they speak for themselves, right? The kinds of problems of the isolation of those kinds of people, etc. Federal employees generally are under insurance programs known as federal employee like health benefit, and they're given options. Very important options. Anybody know why that has become more and more important in recent years? Because the federal employees become what by opting for what can they help certain types of things grow fast? For HMOs as an option, you see, that by giving them that option, by listing it, they can pick up, and some HMOs can very quickly pick up, say, around San Francisco or New York or Florida, millions of people, you see, into different kinds of things, wherever there's big federal population. Yeah. Okay. Anyone want to criticize, shoot, elaborate like you just had? If you're an expert on anything else about Indians or any of this other, you drop it on us. Any more? So that's summation. We got it done. We're going to come to this now with a handout. Let me see where that sheet, like, is this the sheets? Thank you. I want to deal with this by handing you out some data. I give you too many, please send them back. I'm following the policy I earlier told you, seeing where I can. Get them Okay. What we've done then, and to review, I'm going to break at this point before we go on to another subject matter. As I told you I was going to do, break to make just a few comments about what we're doing today, what we're doing, and where some of you stand. Point one. We finished that. We're moving on to some state and locals. And we're going to get back on to group practice with a real exercise. What I've brought is some printouts. And then you'll have some sheets to work with, but you won't be able to keep of an actual large group practices computer printouts, okay? So that I want you to get that exercise. I said we're going to get down to some nitty-gritty, so we can go over lines, look at how they budgeted. We'll speculate as to why they're off from wherever they should be. What does it mean? What is the significance of waiting some of this? With the last hour is going to be on getting you ready for the HMO stuff 2 weeks from now. For the spring break, we don't need 2 weeks now. The last point I'm making is that I think 3 or 4 of you have, and not taken very seriously, the point I've been making for 3 weeks now is that if you're going to get away from being closed off, the whole idea was not to turn in papers at the very end. So some of you are already scheduled to finish your papers in March and are already outlined. Others have modified outlines and are moving along. Others are, and I've told you I'm totally open to conferences. I've conferred probably last week at 12 conferences because some people went more than once. I'm open to that, and I just urge very strongly you realize that I announced early I'm going to be gone from tomorrow for 10 days during the spring break to get it over with and to come in with your proposals. Otherwise, you're going to be crunched at meeting deadlines, okay? If you have not yet outlined, if you've talked with me but haven't outlined, then outline rapidly. But from here on in, either meet me after class today or arrange to meet me rather promptly after the 14th so that you're giving me your deadlines too. Some people have not only, got their outside deadlines. But I assume nobody's going to try to come in here and say that after the vote you took that you want to hand in May papers because, for all of the disorganization that I may look like I have and the informality of it, I am not a pushover on these kind of issues. The papers are what you're going to be graded on. The percentage of your participation in class, I'm having a pretty good grasp on. That's a smaller percentage, and the paper is the major one. And the two of them together make up the grade. And I just remind you of that again because that was what I conferred with as many people as I could after that vote on that claim. What we're moving on now, if you look at what's in front of you, we can do it, I thought. What I did was pull out of several pages of Romer. And we can talk about them now. To just get in front of you 2 levels of services. Psychiatric, these are by category, but I said the state and locals, rather than examining, since this was not an effort to present a organized ambulatory health care services just in public health settings. We're covering them, but I'm trying to cover them in 2 of their major aspects, and you can see you're bumping into them. The first half of the page, they're out of different portions of it, indicates that in the year 1975, out of a total of over 7 million patients then seen in psychiatric settings, those initials stand for what? Somebody very fast. Who is it that's doing that estimate? ADAMHA? What's the bureaucratic outfit that's talking about? Anybody know fast? I want to call it alcohol, drug abuse, and mental health. Okay, administration. That's who's doing that estimating. 70% are ambulatory. Obviously, in the freestanding ones, it's 100% and lower, and so forth. The largest, called community mental health centers, when would they not have existed? Although they're the largest here, what year would they have started?
Not before 1962. At least.
63, I believe, okay? Is that correct? The community mental health centers were the thrust. Anybody off the top of their head remember the 5 components they had to have to qualify as a community mental health center? Start calling them out. Anybody remember what you had to have to offer, call yourself a community mental health center to put in for a grant? Anybody remember them? You had to offer, obviously, the outpatient services, okay, that are implicit in it, but what did you have to absolutely show them you had that don't seem to be there in an outpatient center? 24-hour coverage, hospital backup. I can't remember all five myself, but they're that order of thing, you remember? And that meant those had to be shown, okay, in presenting them. Now, we have talked. Let's drop down and notice this is the only, in contrast to services for almost anything else in the American medical care system, notice that in number 4 place, compared to the rest of the American medical care system, come the private psychiatrist's office, and then down in 6th place, the private psychologist's office, okay? It's terribly important to notice this. You don't believe for a moment, do you, that if you were to list all visits, all outpatient encounters, right, in that huge number for adult medicine, for pediatrics, for obstetrics, that you wouldn't first have those way up there and way below them organized group settings, and then way below that maybe HMO settings and things like that. You see, totally, these people exist largely in organized settings. The freestanding, look at them, psychiatric clinics and the community mental health clinics combined comprise well over 3 million of, very important for you to notice the difference in these things. Now, we were talking about state and local government. First, does a community mental health center, where does it get its dollars? Let's talk about it. Anybody have any experience with any of them? Huh? It began, but what was the rule? It was from the very beginning understood to be like going from 90 right to 0. In other words, they would become freestanding. So they always had to show they were getting money from where, and how did they get it? Where do they get their money? They have to develop a business office and collections, they're improving on that, collecting fees from the people, and they had to always show they were getting, say, county, state, municipality, anything, but they had to have contributed. A typical community mental health center might have a catchment area of 6 counties, and the 6 county commissioners might contribute $40,000 apiece to the budget. The feds might today have in, $400,000, where they used to have $2 million. They might still have a $2 million budget, you see. So they've come off of being federally funded and had to move in this direction. And when they don't, all of the reviews and the site reviews and all those things are terribly critical of them. Okay? Some of you are potential administrators. Are mental health administrators poorly paid? Yeah, you think so? You'd be surprised. Take a look at it sometime and get curious, okay? And in terms of dollars, I've been shocked when I, call around to take a look at them, because they're not that good administrators sometimes, but when they got MSW after the name, or if they got psychologist after their name and been made an administrator, then they think nothing of paying them, $55,000, $60,000 plus car allowances, plus very ample fringes. See, they're moving, unlike the typical group administrator who only moves with his doctors or near them if he is working for them and earning, you follow me? So they may give him a reward for, making them more money. He may know he's never going to move where they move, okay? These people have often surprised me as to how they move.
Where do they get the money though, when it's so hard to run for mental health?
I don't know. Take a look at some of their budgets. I've been take a look at some of the, sometimes people that know where I stand on issues will send me the clippings. So if some of you want to read such clippings, I'll bring them to you. You know, where there's been an outbreak in a community, without putting down these people, you know, like I've said before, MSW, psychologists, psychiatrists are apt to be analytical more than other people, and therefore, when they quit, they very often write a letter to the editor describing the perks of the administrator and the horrible way he's administered the place. And that causes an outbreak in a nearby university department of psychology, and they write a series of letters to the editor saying, yes, and on my site review of the place, and on my working there once was a summer, you know, it was a horror house, and then they begin to lay out that 4 people are drawing down the whole budget of over 15% of the whole budget of $2 million, you know, and then somebody answers and says, no, that isn't possible, and then they said, well, then how about this one's salary being that, and this one's salary being that, and then that's never answered. So, you know, that was right out of the latest budget book. Remember, the Freedom of Information Act has blown a lot of this open. Sunshine laws, you all understand? Decide when you're taking a job whether you want to live in the sunshine law. Okay? Very often, you see these are places in which you can, with very little effort, find out anything you want to know about. Just write the right letter, you know, to the state, ask them for a copy of their budget. They may write back and say it's cost you 10 cents a Xerox sheet, okay? But you with me on the thing? There can be skewed budgets here, in my opinion. Considering the hard times that several of you are looking skeptically at me having. If I hadn't run into this kind of thing, I would have thought these people were really yeomen working for about $22,000 until I see their budgets. I certainly wouldn't hire them for more than $22,000 from having talked to them and how little they know about doing the collections they're expected to do, or, you know, or run a good place, or have general idea of good personnel rules or anything else. But any comments? That table tell us anything else? Any other things? State and county mental hospitals, right? These are services being offered which are still may very significantly be ambulatory, okay? General hospital psychiatric units, right? We've seen them down there. We were talking about state and county, right? You remember we said earlier, student health services we'd skipped over. We're bumping into this up above, and we're bumping into them below. You notice when we get to family planning. In other words, a university is listed in the bottom list for family planning services. You know, these are the sponsoring organizations, okay? Remember, that's 75. You're talking now, 8 years later, you've had a revolution in the volume of services. When you think, I mean, this data is lagging badly, but it's the best I could get. It's out of Romer, just published in '82, and I assume he was seeking for the very latest data. But to get it good, you'd have to get it from a study, and the feds may not have done a more recent study. That's the problem. This is not their first bag. It's due constant evaluation, you know, more quality.